Welcome to the Angling Wisdom Podcast, your go-to source for practical advice and expert insights to enhance your fishing skills. Join us as we explore the science and tactics behind catching diverse freshwater species across North America. We will have expert biologists and anglers share insights into the species we all love to catch. Get ready for the culmination of angling wisdom and fun. I'm your host, Patrick Edwards, and this is the Angling Wisdom Podcast. Welcome to another episode of Angling Wisdom. It's good to have you back. Today we're going to talk about 5 things you may not have known about trout. Where I live, there are a ton of trout. And so I hear people that travel through Wyoming all the time. They're talking about, oh man, I can't wait to go fishing for trout. I can't wait to go do this and that. And they all have this scene in their minds of a river runs through it. And those of you who've watched that movie understand exactly what I'm talking about. The fly fishing, the streams, the water, doing all that. But when I think of trout, I don't think of that at all. I typically think of these monster trout that T-bone a crankbait that I'm throwing for walleye or trout or, a big jig, because they're quite predatory fish. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some things you may not know about trout. And so number 1 is you may not have known that trout really like to eat mice. You heard that right. It's mice. Fly fishermen know this because they throw mouse patterns for trout. And it is incredible to me how effective a mouse pattern can be for not just trout, but other species of fish, because apparently mice like to get in the water. I'm not really sure why. Maybe they want to swim to the other side of the river. Maybe they want to swim across the lake. I don't know. But trout will absolutely annihilate a mouse. And so I've seen some other crazy things, and you may believe me, you may not. It's fine. I witnessed them, but trout will eat the darndest things. When I was a little kid, I went to the Beartooth Mountains in Montana, and we had a trout pond near our cabin. We figured, you know what, we're going to go catch some grasshoppers. It's like late August, we're going to go catch grasshoppers and throw in the pond, and you could fish the pond too. But the trout would just hammer those grasshoppers. Well, we happened to catch a garter snake. We're like, hey, let's throw that out there and see if the trout will eat it. Believe it or not, the trout ate that snake. So they'll eat snakes too. But it's crazy what trout will eat. They'll even eat baby birds. They'll eat the voles that fall in the water as well. So something to know about trout is they are very much predatory. And if you're a mouse, a vole, a bird, or a garter snake, you better be watching out near that body of water. So that's the number 1 thing I was going to tell you out of the 5 that you may not know about trout is that they will actually eat mice and lots of other things. So you might be a little disturbed at this point, but that is a really cool thing to learn about trout. The second thing is that they're piscivorous. They eat other fish. So a lot of people have in their mind that trout just eat bugs. You're fly fishermen, a lot of those guys are like, yeah, they're just eating bugs. They're eating different larvas and things like that. But let me tell you, as soon as a trout is big enough to eat other fish, they do it. And it makes sense, right? You eat what's available, and all fish do this. If I'm a fish and I want to survive, I eat whatever will fit and whatever's going to fill me up and give me the most energy. It's all instinct. And so I've actually caught, as hard as it is to believe, I've caught carp and suckers on crankbaits because they eat other fish. But trout are no exception. And I have a pretty extreme example. Those of you watching on YouTube, you're going to see a picture here in a second of a 12-inch brook trout that my buddy Seth caught in Idaho. He opened that thing up, and there were 47 baby crappie in this thing. Can you believe that? 47 of these little tiny things. So those of you who want to see the picture, you're listening on audio, go check out our YouTube channel and you can see this for yourself. It's actually absolutely mind-blowing that this tiny little brook trout, 12-inch brook trout, could fit that mini crappie in its stomach. That's insane, but it makes sense. If it's a plentiful food source and they can put it in their stomachs, they're going to eat it. So just know that about trout. They don't just eat bugs, they don't just eat mice and snakes and all that stuff. They eat other fish like crazy. And so if you're ever talking to a fisheries biologist that says, just walleyes and pike eat all the other fish, they're the only piscivorous ones, that is not true. Trout absolutely eat other fish. They are very, very much in that category. And some of the best trout fishing I've ever had has been trolling crankbaits or casting crankbaits for walleyes. You catch some amazing brown trout and rainbow trout. And I've even done it in high mountain lakes catching brook trout. They absolutely love to eat other fish. So here's some tips about that. If you're fishing in a high mountain lake, don't be afraid to throw something a little bit bigger that mimics a minnow. Don't be afraid to throw a crankbait. I threw a 4-inch crankbait way up in the mountains for some 18 to 20-inch brookies. It works. So don't be afraid to do it. Don't be afraid to throw big jigs. Don't be afraid to throw things that imitate minnows. They absolutely eat them. So that's the second thing to know. The third thing is salmonids and trout have amazing olfactory. They can smell really, really well. A lot of people think about catfish and fish like that have barbels that can kind of taste and smell. Obviously, smell being one of the biggest things that actually trout use to determine whether they want to eat something, whether they want to mate with another fish. They use their sense of smell for a lot of different things. So trout are fascinating in that way. And I think a lot of anglers overlook the fact that trout use their sense of smell. I figured out real fast about a decade and a half ago that trout use it as a very primary way of assessing whether they're going to eat something. So years ago, there was a bait that came out. It was called Gulp. A lot of you probably remember Gulp. A lot of you probably still use Gulp, just like I do. Gulp catches a ton of trout. I used to put marabou jigs on and put a 2.5-inch Gulp, throw it out, and catch trout after trout after trout because they love that smell. Whatever it is about the scent formula that Berkeley Gulp makes, they like it. They love it. You've seen guys fishing power bait on the bottom, the little dough balls. A lot of people don't like that because they don't really call that fishing. I mean, it's bait fishing. It works really well. So who cares? I can tell you, I've seen power bait fishermen outfish just about everybody else because, again, what are the trout using primarily? They're using that sense of smell. They're assessing that and saying, man, I think that's food and I'm going to eat that. I've also seen people that have baits that are maybe a little more rotten and maybe not as good. They don't catch any fish, at least trout wise. You might catch that channel cat, but you're probably not going to catch that rainbow. So they do use their olfactory a lot. And so if you aren't considering that when you're going out to fish, you're making a big mistake when you're pursuing trout. So make sure that you're thinking about that. I tip a lot of things, whether it's a spinner, a jig, whatever it is, with something with some scent, because trout use that. So make sure that you don't discount the fact that they like that scent and that they'll actually hit that. One of the things you can do, like on an inline spinner, like a Panther Martin or a Rooster Tail or a Vibark spinner, whatever you're throwing, put a little piece of Nightcrawler off the back. It makes a big difference. And if you don't think it does, go try it and then let me know. But it does make a difference. Also, don't put foul smelling things or like even sunscreen on your hands before handling your lures and bait. Everybody's told me, oh, that's a wives' tale. It makes a difference for trout. It may not make as big of a difference for walleye. I think it still matters a little bit to walleye, but it certainly makes a difference to trout. So be careful to clean your hands off. Take a towel with you. You got to, handle some things, but get that stuff off your hands. It will help you catch more fish if you're not contaminating your bait. The next thing, number 4, is that catching trout in high temperatures is almost like a death sentence and usually is a death sentence to trout. So if you're one of those people that you're like, I love trout and I love to catch and release, should probably not fish in the middle of summer if you're going to go after trout, because of the fact that if you bring them out of the water much, and you handle them much at all because you're stressing them in a higher water temperature, there's a very much, well, at least a much higher likelihood that you're going to end up killing that fish because they can't handle the heat and the stress. So if you're going to catch trout, which are cold water species, typically you want to focus on times when the water is colder or at least cooler. Middle of July, it's probably not going to be the best time. So just something to consider is that trout are extremely sensitive to water temperature. As soon as the water temperatures get up over 60 degrees, you start to have issues with fish being able to survive in a catch and release situation. So again, it's just something to consider. You don't have to do it my way. If you're going to catch and keep, catch them whenever you want. Doesn't matter. But if you do want to release fish, it's kind of like muskies are the same way, and tiger muskies too. You don't want to catch them in really hot conditions and then try to put them back because they're probably not going to make it. So that's number 4. Number 5. This may come as a shock to some of you. Those of you who follow me on Instagram at Angling Wyoming, which is my personal one, you'll know fishing in the middle of winter for trout is my favorite and most productive time. There's a lot of reasons for that. I'm not going to go into all those today, but winter can be a really, really good time to catch really nice trout. And you have a much better success rate of releasing fish if that's what you want to do. Also, your fish keeps better in the cold than it does in the heat. So if you're going to take some home, it's a little bit easier to keep them cool when you're catching them either through the ice or you're wading out in a river like I like to do in the wintertime. So catching fish, especially trout in the wintertime, is a great way to go. They hit really hard. They're not lethargic. They are a lot of fun to catch in the wintertime. So that would be my top 5 things that you may not have known about trout. And I hope that this has been informative. This is one of my shorter ones. So I hope you'll come back and listen to the next one. But next time when you go out trout fishing, consider those 5 things. Maybe it causes you to go out and buy a mouse pattern or a snake pattern to go fishing for some trout. Maybe you're going to throw some cranks for trout because you figure out that they like to eat other fish. I don't know what it is, but if you do go out to buy some lures that work really well for trout, go to pklure.com, check out the next gen Ridgeline crankbaits. They are really amazing. We here at Boysen, we troll those in the spring and the fall, and even the summer if we want to bring some home. And I'll tell you what, those crankbaits catch a ton of trout because trout love to eat other fish. So if you get a chance, go to pklure.com. You can use the code WISDOM at checkout for 20% off. And yeah, I hope you guys go out and try it. It's a lot of fun. Trout are a blast. They fight so hard. Brown trout are one of my favorites. You can see a couple behind me here on my wall. They are so much fun to catch. So get out there and do it. Have fun fishing out there, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Angling Wisdom Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please go to patreon.com/anglingwisdom to sign up for bonus content or just to show your support for the show. You can also subscribe wherever you are listening to or watching this podcast. You can follow us on the socials by searching for Angling Wisdom on Instagram or Facebook. Thanks again to PK Lures for sponsoring this show. You can go to pklure.com and use the code WISDOM to receive 20% off of your next order. And of course, you can always go to anglingwisdom.com for more fishing content. This is Patrick Edwards signing off. I hope to see you out on the water.